Hey folks, Happy New Year and welcome back to The Tent, your place for politics, policy, and progress. I'm Daniela Gibbs-Leger. We have a great interview lined up today with intelligence and foreign policy analyst Malcolm Nance. Malcolm is the author of the forthcoming book, They Want to Kill Americans, the Malicious, Terrorist, and Deranged Ideology of the Trump Insurgency, which will hit bookshelves this July. We'll reflect on the one-year anniversary of the January 6th insurrection, including the House Select Committee investigating what happened that day and what we can do to protect our democracy from future attacks. But first, I have to get to some news. And I got to start by talking about Omicron, or Omarion, as I call him. He is unfortunately out and about and in full force. The Omicron variant now makes up 95% of cases in the United States, and cases are skyrocketing. Earlier this week, the U.S. reached a grim 1 million daily new COVID cases. 1 million. Even if that number is so high, particularly because of testing backlogs during the holiday, there's no doubting how contagious this variant is. And we're now seeing some schools go temporarily virtual to help mitigate further spread. Shout out and solidarity to all my fellow parents out there who are dealing with children at home right now. If you hear a small child in the background, you know why that is. And there are concerns about what the next few weeks might look like as people continue to return home from gatherings over the holidays. Now, the good news is that while hospitalizations are on the slight uptick, the COVID death rate in this country so far is remaining stable, which is more evidence that while Omicron is incredibly contagious, it does seem more mild, but most importantly, it's more proof that the vaccines work. And while there continues to be a huge spike in demand for testing, the administration is using all of the tools in its power to rapidly expand testing capacity and ensure that vaccines are available to anyone and everyone. So I've said it before, and I will say it again. Please, please, please go get your booster. Upgrade those masks, by the way. The cloth masks are better than nothing, but with Omicron, they may not be great. And try to get tested before gathering with others. And getting boosted is so important to ensuring that if you do get COVID, and I'm sure we all know lots of people who have, your symptoms are manageable and you don't end up in a hospital. The healthcare system right now is already struggling with all the other usual seasonal respiratory infections that we see happening right now. So listen, if we don't want this to be another 2022 this year, get your flu shots. Please get your damn booster. Now, I also want to talk about Build Back Better, or maybe the bill formerly known as Build Back Better. When we last spoke, Senator Manchin had gone on Fox News Sunday and declared that he was a no on Build Back Better. Now, in the days that followed and over break, Senator Manchin and President Biden have had additional conversations, and Manchin joined meetings with Democrats again on the bill. So despite what you hear in the media, I have to tell you, I am optimistic about a potential path forward here because we have more clarity about what Joe Manchin is for. Previously, we've only heard, what he was against. We now know that Senator Manchin supports universal pre-K, efforts to cut families' healthcare costs, and that he wants to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to fight in the fight against climate change. And we also know he wants to undo the Trump tax cuts and make corporations and the wealthy pay their fair share. These are all great things. This is a solid foundation to build upon with progressives, with moderates, and the White House in both the House and the Senate. So Senator Manchin now has the opportunity to be accountable to the power of his vote, but he really has to follow through with action and put his cards on the table, say what he's going to support, and then let's vote on it. Now is the time to rebuild faith and trust in these negotiations because, quite frankly, he kind of stepped all over that in December. And let's move quickly to get something done because American families, while they are doing better because of the American Rescue Plan, they're still struggling and they cannot afford to see this legislation or legislation that resembles it die. So, as I always say, watch this space. As always, if there's anything you'd like us to cover on the pod, hit us up on Twitter at @the10pod. That's @the10pod. And stick around for our interview with Malcolm Nance in just a beat. Malcolm Nance is a former U.S. Navy senior chief petty officer specializing in naval cryptology. A frequent media commentator on intelligence and foreign policy, he is the author of several books, including the New York Times bestseller, Defeating ISIS, Who They Are, How They Fight, What They Believe. His new book, They Want to Kill Americans, The Malicious, Terrorist, and Deranged Ideology of the Trump Insurgency, will be published in July 2022. Malcolm Nance, thank you so much for joining us on The Tent.
It is my pleasure to be here, Julie.
I know you have a new book coming out that I want to get to, but I have to start by marking this moment, the 1-year anniversary of the January 6th insurrection. Reflect on what happened just 1 year ago. How are you feeling as we remember this sad and tragic anniversary?
Well, if you recall, 3 days after the election, I was on Real Time with Bill Maher, the HBO TV show. And the election hadn't been called. It was in the process of being called. Bill called it on his show. It was just a foregone conclusion that Joe Biden had won those states. The final counting was being done. And on that show, he really wanted to bring the kumbaya moment to the country, saying we needed to watch and be prepared to help and learn what Trump voters really wanted. And I was not having that. I was bringing it very clearly to the show that I had been seeing many disturbing trends since August 2020, which actually, in fact, started in 2018. But in August 2020, I started seeing militia groups by reading their Instagram channels, their Telegram channels, all these other programs that they were on, and seeing that they were, in fact, preparing for what they thought was going to be a major event during the election or after the election. So I went on Real Time and I said, sorry to say it, I have doom and gloom to tell you, but we are looking at this country going into an insurgency. And I got some rather shocked looks. I said, he said, well, you mean an paramilitary insurgency? And I said, yes, but they're also political. They always start politically. And then they move on to terrorism and paramilitary operations. And I said, that's where we're going. These people see themselves as the armed foot soldiers of the Trump campaign. And 62 days later, it led up to the January 6th insurrection. But an insurrection is only one activity that occurs during insurgencies. There can be many insurrections. There can be many political rebellions in there at the same time, as well as terrorist acts or plots and rebellion. So that being said, I monitored the interior, the communications of many of these militia groups on the day of January 6th. I was watching their live video feed of the first Oath Keeper groups that went to the western side of the Capitol and started the first rioting. And by the time 1 p.m. rolled around, I had 6 different people monitoring 6 different video feeds. And we could clearly see they were there to take the building. So, that no one could see this coming is sort of a fallacy, because, in fact, the Michigan plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer was Plan B. Their Plan A was to storm the state capitol in November 2020, take the representatives hostage, and let the Republicans go and put on trial and execute all the Democrats. So I went into January 6, 2021, thinking about that plot, and it was happening before my very eyes.
Wow. That is when I hear you talk about that period after the election and how there were some folks who were like, well, now we need to heal. And you and others like, this is actually the most dangerous period right now between the end of the election and when Joe Biden is actually inaugurated. And, I think it's so important that we have to hold those who were responsible for what happened on January 6th accountable, so it doesn't happen ever again. And thanks to the work of the Select Committee investigating January 6th, we keep learning more and more damning evidence about the former president's actions and state of mind that day, and what all of his closest allies really thought about Trump's efforts to overturn a free and fair election, looking at you, Sean Hannity. So what do you make of the committee's work thus far, and what will you be looking for in the weeks and months ahead from them?
Well, far be it from me to disparage anything the committee is doing, and they are doing the yeoman work in order to find out exactly how this manifested itself, who is involved. However, that is not accountability. That is identifying the perpetrators. That is identifying the people who may have taken part in this campaign. And there was a plot. I saw the outlines of what the militias were doing and how they congealed and came together, particularly the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, and the 3% militia. By the 3rd or 4th of November, we started seeing all of these individuals going to tactical military training camps and talking to each other on their channels about getting their weapons and their equipment together. By December 12th, the first major protest, they came into D.C., in their own words, to protect the president and the White House against the Antifa bands and mobs that they thought were there. But that protest also led to them having major coordination sessions, so that by the time December 21st came and the first words of January 6th were about to be their coordination date, many of them thought, quite rightly, that they were being given orders to go and take that building. We know people had T-shirts printed up, right? Civil War, January 6, 2021. This was not a joke to them. And many analysts saw this. And, I have to give credit to Clint Watts at MSNBC, my coworker, who said that the most dangerous period would be between the election day and the inauguration day. And as a counterterrorism specialist, we both saw this as where armed insurrection or armed action could take place. But for me, it was clearly by mid-December that we were really in the throes of what people thought were an opportunity to use their Second Amendment remedies to affect change in America. So, I was very cautious early on about using the words coup d'etat, because a mob is not a coup. But now we find that there was organized planning done at the highest levels of government, that the president himself was enthralled with what he thought was him being reinstalled in government, and that Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro had laid out this framework for 150 Republican, I think the actual number is 147, Republican members of the House, and almost all the Republican senators were in on a plot, to be quite honest, to nullify the election and retain Donald Trump as president of the United States. That now is a coup d'etat. They intended to overthrow a democratically elected government. And the masses of people who came there that day were armed and prepared for this. So the only thing that I see the committee lacking at this point is the actual documentary evidence of a bridge between the campaign, Steve Bannon, Roger Stone, and the foot soldiers on the street. And I know we're going to get it, because Roger Stone was under the protection of the Proud Boys. This is the man who created the original Brooks Brothers riot in the year 2000, where they stormed the voting offices with Republican operatives. This would have been a large manifestation of that. There were 40,000 people on that mall. As many as 10,000 attacked that building. And as far as we know, 2,000 or more entered the building, and they've arrested over 700 of them. This was not an accident. This was a direct attack on democracy. But there's no accountability happening here. I don't think anyone will be charged criminally in this if they didn't enter that building. Unfortunately, it's part of the comedy of the way we like to do business. We like to think of these people as being wayward and misguided, when in fact we would never think that about Black Lives Matter or Antifa or any Muslim group that may be protesting.
Right.
These people conspired, and we really need to hold them accountable.
They are afforded a level of grace isn't the right word, but leniency that is, or understanding that is not given to anybody else. I was struck by a few recent polls that I want to ask you about. One recent NPR poll found that while 64% of Americans believe our democracy is in crisis, the vast majority of Republicans think democracy is failing because there was widespread voter fraud in the last election, like a quantifiably false claim. And this poll stood out to me too. A recent survey out of the University of Chicago found that 21 million Americans sympathize with the insurrectionists and believe that using force to restore then President Trump to power was justified. Now, I know you're a longtime intelligence analyst and expert, and you have the new book coming out that details the Trump insurgency. So I imagine that you may not find a lot of these numbers as shocking as I and others do. But without giving too much away from your book, because everyone should go out and buy it, how has all of this happened? How big is the threat that is out there, and what on earth can we do about it?
Well, I unfortunately had to title this book with the sentiment that I was getting from monitoring right-wing militias and these interior pro-Trump, pro-violence groups. And that is, they want to kill Americans. That's the title of the book. Some of these people were reveling in the idea of overthrowing government and, quote unquote, taking back America. They have this image in their head that whatever version of reality that's happening inside, between both of their ears, even though it's empirically a non-starter. There is just no way to quantify any of the things that they believe as facts, but they don't care. They are believing that their emotion and what they have been told in their propaganda information sphere and the directions that they think they're getting from their tribal chief, which is Donald Trump, that is all that exists. You are literally watching a tribal rebellion of the uneducated segment of white America consolidating themselves around a tribal chieftain who thinks that he can, and knows actually, he can mobilize forces at the lift of a finger. And when the insurrection apparently failed and Joe Biden was inaugurated, for a short period of time, I thought, wow, my book, which I started in fall of 2020, I said, wow, this thing may peter off quickly. But by March, it was apparent that this thing was on rocket fuel. They were absolutely, positively not going to take the results of that election at all. And if they had to, they would kill to do it. I've been monitoring these chats. I've been monitoring these threads. And there's always one guy who's in there goes, what's our breaking point? And everybody wants to use their guns. They've got this big, sexy thing going on. You saw it at the Capitol. Everyone wanted to bring their tactical gear and their, cosplay that they were 5th Group Special Forces team, or SEAL Team 6. But, there were guns there. We've identified guns on people. There were armed officers who were part of the rebellion there. What next time? They are going to come with their AR-15s. And I don't know whether it's going to be they start seizing state houses and then governors are friendly to their seizures. I don't know whether they are just going to start attacking federal institutions like the suicide bomber we had about 15 years ago who flew an airplane into the IRS building in Texas, right? Anti-government, anti-tax extremist. But there will be a precipitating event. And it may be asymmetric. It may be as simple as them dropping packages of explosives from drones on protesters. I don't know. What I do know is they, and when I say they, I mean the pro-Trump extremists who took part in the insurrection, supporting the insurrection, 1/3 of the electorate, they absolutely feel that they should go to guns and take back the country, which they believe has been stolen from them because the election didn't go their way. And many of them do want to kill. And that's the most dangerous component that law enforcement and intelligence and federal officers are going to have to really knuckle down on. Who is plotting to kill?
Well, so that leads to my follow-up, which is, can this threat actually be managed? Or is, right-wing political extremism so entrenched now in this country that we can only expect more and more political violence in the years ahead?
I often try to figure out what would it take to break the fever here. If you recall, President Obama once famously said the fever will break eventually in some of these more passionate people. I don't think so. I think many of them, and certainly through my research for this book, look, I cut out 50,000 words in this book of incidents describing acts of violence, organization, and near violence. And this was way before we found out anything from the January 6th committee about the higher levels of details of what they intended to do. It boggles the mind. But what will it take? I don't think that it would even, I don't think a 9/11 level event would garner would shock them back to reality and garner the level of respect that they need to have for the central government. Interestingly enough, the Russians developed an information warfare strategy back in the 1980s, and they have been executing it against the United States with their amplification of lies, disinformation, tying in Russia Today into Fox News. And that strategy was to make the populace of a foreign country welcome an invasion, right? Now, that sounds a little far-fetched, but that is their actual doctrine. I'm not saying that that's happened here, but it has happened within the Republican Party and Donald Trump, that if there were a negative act against the United States that caused the loss of lives and it embarrassed Joe Biden, they would embrace that. And we sort of saw a miniature version of that when the suicide bomber killed Marines in Afghanistan. They decided that 20 years of war in Afghanistan never happened. Only Joe Biden bringing out 150,000 Afghans and 13 of our men and women soldiers and sailors and Marines being killed was, an event tantamount to treason. My problem is many of them have guns, and, whether law enforcement can intercept this, whether like in the Michigan militia plot, somebody on the inside of that plot went to the FBI and said they intend to kill state troopers. They didn't have a problem killing the governor. They had a problem killing cops.
Right.
By the grace of God, we are probably any day away from a catastrophic incident, but I don't think it'll unify the country.
Well, that's just terrifying. So I want to end by asking you about voting rights, which is tied into all of this. Senate Democrats are making a push to pass critical voting rights legislation ASAP. And many say they want to make changes to the filibuster if Republicans continue to use it to block both the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act by Martin Luther King Day. Now, I want to be clear that what happened on January 6th can't be solved by legislation and is a much bigger, all-encompassing problem that you've clearly just detailed. But as someone who thinks about attacks on democracy, tell our listeners why you think these bills and protecting the sacred right to vote in this country are so important.
Well, let me demur from your assessment. I really do think that passing Voting Rights Act would give us the tools to stop and to put in check, at the very least, the fever dreams of some of these people. Look, the John Lewis Voting Rights Bill would turn election day into a federal holiday. It would authorize all forms of mail-in voting. It would authorize same-day registration. All the things that Republicans don't want to happen because they know their ardent, older, longtime voters are the ones that will go over glass to vote. And they don't want kids voting. They don't want the average high schooler who turns 18 voting. They know all of these things would facilitate that in the 2022 election. And let me be honest with you. The 2022 election is, we said the 2020 election was the one that would determine whether American democracy would end. Well, that was just a delay in game. If the Democrats and the independent Republicans, or, the former conservative Republicans like myself, who now find ourselves way to the left of the spectrum because the party went crazy, if they don't win this election, we don't retain the House and the Senate, American democracy will end, period. Because they are not joking about installing Donald Trump as Speaker of the House, impeaching Joe Biden and Kamala Harris monthly, and undoing everything that has been done. Voting rights is it. If we don't pass voting rights, if in some way they can't get Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin to understand that they will be voted out. Kirsten Sinema, God knows what she thinks, all right, because she's an enigma. Joe Manchin, I can understand. He's from West Virginia. But voting rights would guarantee them a great shot of staying in office. There is no more Senate for Joe Manchin if it remains the way it is, unless he flips and becomes a Republican. But it is everything. Look, I'm a Philadelphian. I grew up in the shadow of the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall. Some of my greatest days of thinking were carried out in the benches behind Independence Hall. I am a true patriot. I love this country. We are standing on the precipice of the end of American democracy today.
Wow, those are some really powerful words to end this interview on. I want to thank you so much for this really great, sobering, important conversation. And as a reminder for our listeners, your new book, They Want to Kill Americans, The Malicious, Terrorist, and Deranged Ideology of the Trump Insurgency, will hit bookshelves in July. Malcolm Nance, I want to thank you again so much for coming back on The Tent.
It's my pleasure.
As always, thanks for listening. I hope you all had a safe and healthy holiday break. Have to talk about two things. One, if you are in the mid-Atlantic area, you're looking at and dealing with the remnants of a snowstorm that seemingly came out of nowhere. Now, it didn't, because the weather people told us it was coming. But the day before we got, I'm looking at about 7-8 inches here in DC. It was 65 degrees. Hello, global warming. So perhaps people didn't believe them when they said, no, a major snowstorm is really going to come, when people were out in shorts and flip-flops the other day. Now, if you don't know this about me, I'm a bit of a weather nerd. So I understand why they didn't pre-treat the roads. Because it was so warm, any pre-treatment was going to get washed away with the rain that fell first. But what that meant is that when that snow came, and then it came very, very fast, and it got really, really cold, and traffic became a nightmare. And I'm sure you all saw the huge backup on Interstate 95 for miles and miles, people stuck in their cars for some 24 hours, including Senator Tim Kaine, who was just coming from Richmond, which is just a 2-hour drive away. It is a good reminder to all of us who have cars to have an emergency kit in your car. I realized that I have hey, my kid scrapes his knee and we're out, and I got some Band-Aids and stuff, but I don't have we're stuck on a road and it's Carmageddon all over again. So be sure to do that unless you live in Florida, and then maybe your emergency kit is different. It's something about maybe hurricanes or alligators. Second thing I got to talk about is it's the new season of The Bachelor, people. Okay. Clayton, I haven't finished the first episode, so I will reserve judgments for that a little bit later on. But I've watched enough of it, and I watched Michelle's season enough to know that Clayton seems boring, but perfectly fine and nice. I think the hate that's being directed at him is not fair. Directed at the casting people, because they're the ones who chose this pretty boring person to be the Bachelor. But let's be honest, if you looked at those previews, it looks messy. And why do we watch The Bachelor? For mess. So I'm going to hold out judgment, and I'm going to keep watching, even though I think he's about as exciting as someone said, unsalted saltines. Because the mess is what I come for, and it looks like there's going to be a lot of it. And I love TV that takes my mind off of the mess that is the world that we live in. So those are my thoughts on The Bachelor. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter if you ever want to talk about it, at dgimmer123, by the way. I hope you all are continuing to take care of yourselves, that you're boosted, that you're masked up, and, just hunker down. It might be a long winter, but I do believe that we are going to get through this if we all look out for each other and ourselves. Take care, and we'll talk to you next week. The Tent is a podcast from the Center for American Progress Action Fund. It is hosted by me, Daniela Gibbs-Leger. Kelly McCoy is our supervising producer. Trisha Whitcomb is our booking producer. And Sam Signorelli is our digital producer. You can find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.